Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my next conversation is with Leilani, Farha, and Fredrik Gertten, and we talk about their new film, Push. It's a story about the stress of living in cities, frankly. It's about so much more than that. It's a beautiful and engaging film, and it's a journey to try to better understand what actually is going on in this desire to find affordable housing and to reduce that gap, making cities affordable, making it easy to access, a place to live and a place to live well. So we talk about real estate. We talk about this being a global issue and unaffordability. We talk about how hedge funds are taking over people's homes and how there's this new kind of landlord and this economic infrastructure that's been built over quite a few years and something that so many of us don't really know much about, and how this distance between the owner and the resident is growing all the time. It's a metaphor, but it's also the reality. We talk about deregulation and about how to change our approach to advocacy and how we need to get more strategic about that. This is about the displacement of people and it's about global versus local money, I suppose you could say. We talk about the end of the Milton Friedman era and how this is about capitalism that's kind of run amok, and we get into gentrification and why that really isn't the issue when it comes to affordable living, and how human rights law and engaging governments are really what it's going to be all about, and in this attempt to change the discourse. So stay tuned for a fascinating conversation and a film that you want to look more into. You can find out about it, pushthefilm.com for sure. That's the name of the film, Push. And coming right up, this conversation. So stay tuned. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my writing and speaking. Order a copy of Real Change is Incremental. I'd appreciate it. And if you can support the work we're doing here at Face to Face, that would be brilliant. You can do that financially through patreon.com and pledge as little as $1 a month. We would appreciate it for sure. And if you can't do that, please do leave a comment on iTunes or Spotify or something along those lines. Share us with your friends. Sign up for the newsletter. Consider advertising on Face to Face. That would also be something you could do to support the work we're doing here. And don't forget so many more other interviews on facetofacelive.ca. And I also appear on rabble.ca, another platform that has journalists and bloggers and podcasters that you're going to want to dig into. Don't forget rabble.ca. That's news for the rest of us. And of course, coming right up, Fredrik Gertten and Leilani Farha talking about their new film, Push. Well, welcome to Face. We're joined by two very special guests here with us today. In town for Hot Docs Film Festival, Documentary Film Festival here in Toronto. With us today, Fredrik Gertten and Leilani Farha, here to talk about their new film, Push. Thank you both for joining me today on Face to Face.
Thanks.
So tell me why we can't afford anymore to live in our cities. I mean, maybe we should just start with a question right in, and then through that, as you guys maybe unpack that question, we can talk a little bit about the film and how it's being received and so on.
Well, that was my question when I started to make the film, because I was, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I travel the world with my films, and I meet a lot of audience. And suddenly, I heard stories from all over the world about people, about the stress of living in cities, the stress of prices going up everywhere. So the film for me is almost like a quest to understand that question. So the whole film is actually. That's what we try to, and when I contacted Leilani Farha, who has this amazing job as a UN Special Rapporteur on adequate housing, I found a person who also had this kind of global perspective and the global quest to understand this issue. So actually, we've been spending 2 years with this question, and it's not something you see it, but why is it? I mean, very early on, we understood it's not gentrification. Gentrification is like a very sloppy thing that everybody's throwing around, and I meet people with guilty face. I'm a gentrifier. You know, it's not about that. It's something much stronger, a totally different energy coming into our cities. That's what so that's a part of the film.
Yeah, and what Fredrik said is so right. There's nothing organic about what's happening right now that's creating this unaffordability. It is some really big financial actors with a business model that they are implementing in cities, and it is having this tremendous and disastrous effect for people who are just struggling to stay in their homes.
So, Leilani, I'd love to know how you guys kind of met, and maybe it sounds something as focused, Fredrik, on I'm going to make this film. Here's the question I want to investigate, and here's who I need to make a part of the film. But I'd love to hear about how that relationship developed. But Leilani, before you talk about that, is it this unaffordability, this global crisis that we're facing? Is it intentional? Is it coming out of capitalism in a sense? You know, Joseph Stiglitz, I think, calls it illegal capitalism, or later on in the film. But yeah, is it something by design? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I mean, I think it is by design that residential real estate has become the go-to investment asset.
Right.
That is by design. I think it is about capitalism, but I think it's about capitalism run amok. You know, it's an unregulated capitalism. It's an unregulated industry. It is an unregulated business, and it just happens that where this business has gone is it's attached itself to a very lucrative thing, which is this alternative asset class called residential real estate. So in that way, it is quite purposeful. Now, if tomorrow, for some strange and bizarre reason, there was no more profits to be wrung out of residential real estate, these guys, and they're mostly guys, would move on and park their money elsewhere.
Right, they would find something else.
I think they will move on. I mean, when I've been watching these hedge funds taking over housing, you know, poor people's homes, basically, you can see the value of these companies. They only buy a hedge fund watching and you know, an area in a town where they want to buy, the prices go up. The value of the company goes up because the market knows that they will make money out of this. So if the city owns the houses, the value is something totally different. But if the new owner is a hedge fund, boom, the price of the buildings goes up. So it's something about who owns it also. The value has a relation to these kind of new owners. And I would say, and that's something I've been taking out of these years of working with the film, is that it is a new kind of landlord. It's a landlord on speed. It's like, or you know, it's like it's something we haven't seen before. And Blackstone, which now happen to be a hedge fund, and they are the biggest landlord in the U.S., in Spain, in Ireland, and other countries. They're growing everywhere. They didn't own an apartment building until 2011. So it's like they were doing other stuff before, you know. So it's and there are many others like them that entered, you know, after the financial crisis. So it's
Fredrik.
I think. Yeah.
Fredrik, it's interesting when you say there, you know, as you were almost uttering the phrase "new kind of landlord," I was kind of going there myself. That's not I love that phrase, by the way. So it's it's almost like a landlord without a moral conscience. Is that fair?
That's of course fair, but it's not about moral. It's not about moral because in history we've had a lot of slumlords. There's a lot of landlords without moral. That's not a new thing. There have always been good or bad landlords, and so it's not about that. It's about the scale of it and the energy into it. Because as a traditional landlord would grow organically with his business, but these guys, they can grow because they it's not their money. They open up the financial product, the security, and then it's like money just floats in from all over the world. So it's pension funds, it can be criminal money, it can be anything, and that money goes straight into our cities. And and Professor Stiglitz says it quite well in the film. That's the distance between the tenant and the owner of his home has never been larger. And the owner of your home has no idea about you, or they don't even know where their assets are, So the editor of this film, Eric, we were sitting at the edit room and we started to talk about the pension funds. And because that's, of course, the pension funds has a lot of money. Half of the money on the world's global stock markets are pension money. So there's, of course, everybody who has this kind of hedge funds, they want to attract pension funds. But Eric then looked into his own, and he found out that he was also owning Blackstone shares. So maybe I also am a Blackstone owner. Maybe I also own a home somewhere on the planet, or many homes, or a part of many homes. So this is the new thing, and I think that's the ambition of the film is not to tell people how things are. It's like it invites you all into this kind of journey into understanding and into getting ourselves a new language about on what's going on, because the language about housing has been controlled by the construction companies, by the big landlords, by their think tanks, their academics. So I think if you want to change something, it's also about shifting the language. And
changing.
I hope the film can be a part of that.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it is. And I mean, it's about the conversation, and it's about the questions, and it's about the question that you started with. As you said earlier on about what you started with when you wanted to dive into this film. Leilani, I think you say at one point that a third of deaths around the world are related to poverty and inadequate housing, I believe was the phrase. It might have been at a roundtable or at a conference that you're at in the film. And by the way, congratulations to both of you. The film is terrific. It's the kind of film that everyone needs to see. And before you dive in there, Leilani, how did it go? So it was you premiere last night at Hot Docs. How was the Q&A?
Well, I think Fredrik should answer that question. I'll just say that for me, the energy in the room was amazing. Of course, for me, it's also a bit of a home audience in that I'm Canadian. Right. So I think there was a little added element that way. But there was a good vibe in a sold-out, huge theater. But I want to hear Fredrik's reaction to it as the filmmaker.
For me, the coolest thing was that people almost straight on started to talk about their own town.
Right.
And we had the world premiere a few weeks back in Copenhagen, and everybody in the audience talked about their own city. And I think this will happen. We are soon going to Germany for the premiere, and we already know that people are they will be talking about Germany and the German cities. And then we go to Spain, and then so this film is now, we already know that it's going to many countries, both for broadcast and for theaters, and I now know, I could get that feeling yesterday. Yes, people will start. They don't need to talk to me or to Leilani. They can talk to each other and to their own politicians. Nice. I think that's cool. And of course, then you will also be part of this. To define what is going on and what is the language. Because if we can win the language, we can also. It will be easier to create change, because the more money you have, the more money you invest into lobbying, into think tanks, and that's why they are controlling the public agenda in many ways. So if you want to push back, which we think push back is a good hashtag for this campaign. If you want to push back, you also have to take over the language, and then because there are progressive politicians or politicians in many cities feel the stress. And they have to do something. They are a bit lost because politics have lost a lot of influence over the last 40 years. I mean, we know that the answer has been that the tagline from the lobby has been deregulation, deregulation, deregulation. You can still hear them talk about it's government deregulations problem that creates the housing crisis. So so we also need to fight their talking points.
I think too, this idea that the film is provoking conversations about the cities where the film is screening. What's so cool to me is I think what will happen is people will see the film, and then many of them will be renters themselves. They will look into who is actually owning their building. They will see that it's no longer a mom and pop kind of landlord, nor is it even a small business. They're going to see that it is these multi-billion-dollar asset management firms. They will realize then that that's part of the problems they're experiencing, that it's related to this huge landlord, and they will then know that this can't be fought just by doing small little actions, that they're going to have to up their game. And for me, that's really exciting, because even the advocates around in different cities that I go, in many, not all, but in some cities, and I would say this is very true in Canada, they're advocating a little bit, they're behind the times. They haven't quite caught up with these guys and what's happening with these financial actors. They haven't changed their advocacy strategy to match what we're up against here. And when I speak to audiences, that's what I'm often, not audiences of the film, because this is new, but when I just do my work as a rapporteur, I'm always saying, we need to understand who are the players, and we have to change. This is as Fredrik said, these are new landlords. This is a new landscape, and we need to change our strategies so that we're making sure we're going to address the new reality.
Yeah, we can't have the same language to talk
exactly
that we had 20 years ago to talk about the new landscape.
What's so interesting, and you bring it out well in the film throughout, it's a thread for sure, this idea that this is not about gentrification. You've already mentioned that, but Saskia Sassen gets into it and talks about early on in the film about how much deeper it really goes. And I love how she brings out this notion that this isn't even about money, because when you're talking about, does she actually quote $270 trillion in assets? Is that the number?
This is 217, I think it is.
And it's a crazy number, whatever it is.
It's a crazy number. That's actually the value of all real estate, commercial and residential. And if you break it down by just residential, actually that's the greatest proportion, and it's actually valued at $163 trillion. So it's none of us know what that means.
Well, exactly right. And that's what her point is so brilliant. This isn't even about money. I mean, it's and that's, I think, around at the time in the film too, when Stieglitz talks about, the gap and the displacement and where's the human component here? And in Notting Hill, these are dead zones. These are just empty buildings. Yeah. They're just shells. Yeah. They're just investments. Exactly. They're not properties. We're not talking about men and women and boys and girls. We're just talking about it's an investment.
Yeah,
and that's nothing to do with gentrification.
No. And as we've identified, Fredrik and I laugh sometimes. It's the way these purchases are happening. It's like a multi-pack. You know, like at H&M, you buy six socks in one package. Well, that's what people are doing with real estate now.
Right.
You know, it's crazy.
And that also happens here in Toronto.
Very,
I mean,
much. Yeah.
So people,
Fredrik,
new condos coming up. Yeah.
I so love the shot near the end of the film. To me, it could have been easily the poster, but there's a shot of somebody working in the garden, and I'm pretty sure it's the Toronto or part of of Toronto's condominium-like skyline these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not against building new houses.
Sure.
I think it's great with new houses. What I see here in Toronto, which I feel is a bit sad, is that the architecture is quite poor.
Mm.
It's not really good homes.
No.
It's very much a copy and paste architecture. So it's very speculative capitalism in many ways. So it's not really someone who wants to build a new Toronto, a vision for a new life. You know, it's like it's quick money.
Definitely.
And that's sad. And I think politics must be stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually move investors in a way so you will building a new, better society, a new, better city. We love cities, but we have to nurture them. Yeah. We have to nurture what we love, so people can meet and people can, that's so people can talk to each other. That's cities. We have cities for thousands of years. The street has always been a public space. And this is something we're losing now. And I mean, and Toronto is a lovely. I've been coming to Toronto for like 15 years, and the changes are extreme.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is a point that Fredrik raises that I love this point because there is a visual aspect to what's happening. When I like that idea that when we look around the city of Toronto, or the same thing is happening in Melbourne, one of my favorite cities. I lived there for a couple of years. It was a beautiful city. And now the same thing is happening. You look up and you see these buildings and when your eye rests on them, they were not built to grow the city with some vision and some idea of turning the city into a better place. They are clearly put up as a way to satisfy investors, and that's it.
And because it's not local money, it's not local investors.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw there was a little bit a segment from the former Haygate estate in London.
In London, yes, of course. Yeah,
it's now called Elephant Park. That's an Australian company building. So it's money coming from somewhere else. They're not building it for themselves. They're not going to live there. So it was all sold on fairs in Hong Kong and Singapore.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're not. So those people who are saying, yes, I want to buy a unit off plan, as it's called, they're not. They have no vested interest in a beautiful building going up, unless that means more value for their money, right? But other than that, they have no vested interest in ensuring that whatever's going up is somehow contributing to city life or the community or whatever,
And then there were like 3,000 people living there. Yeah. And those houses were not really old. They were built in the 70s.
Yeah.
And they went down. And they go down because somebody can see money to be made. But the whole community was displaced. And when we were there, they were all empty apartments. We could see some key boxes for Airbnbs,
Yeah.
So I mean,
So at one point near the end of the film too, through your interviewing, it was wonderful to see Joseph Stiglitz on camera and kind of taking some shots at frankly at unbridled free market capitalism. Can I say that? The high priest, he says, is Milton Friedman, and then he goes on to talk about how Friedman kind of, or at least that approach, that understanding of these economic saviors, let's call them, provided, I think the quote is, an economic argument for why they should be unconcerned about morality. And this is a question for both of you, is this a way to try to attend to this? Obviously, regulation, there's other political issues. It's about getting people thinking locally and talking about the issues and raising the level of the conversation. But how do you get to that hedge fund manager, or is it even possible?
But the question came a bit late. I have to answer the other things first.
Go. Fredrik, take whichever one you want. I usually ask about 6 questions embedded in one, so I'll let you take whichever one you want.
Clearly.
But no, I mean, neoliberalism or deregulation has been something asked for a long time, and I'm sure there was a lot of regulations were important to take down because information technology, society has changed. You have to, you can't run a society with the old rules, but it became a little bit of religion that also very many progressive politicians thought was the right way to go.
Right.
And now we can see there was also a downside of deregulation. And I think a lot of politicians are seeing that. So I think we're totally in the end of Milton Friedman, the Milton Friedman era in many ways. I mean, even Trump is in one way is reflecting a right-wing take of the critique of that because he also wants to build walls,
Right.
So it's time to take the full step out and say, okay, now it's over. We now know. That's what Stiglitz says.
Yeah.
We now know
didn't work.
that it didn't work. The theory was wrong.
Yeah.
So then okay, it's time now to go. Okay, so what is now the post neoliberalism? What is the next step? I don't say build walls, big new. Maybe globalism is a good thing. The global economy. I mean, we have to find new ways. But I mean, and I think also Saskia points out the local economy. We have to defend the local economy.
Right.
And she says, why should I buy a cup of coffee from a multinational? Because then some part of the consumption capacity of the neighborhood walks out. So we have to start to thinking how to build our cities for the citizens. If you look at the hedge funds, they are not investing their own money. They are middlemen. They are, intermediary sector.
Yeah.
They are like Airbnb. They are like Uber. They are somebody who makes money out of our needs, our daily needs. And maybe that's something we also have to look into. We need the money to stay local because that's better.
Yeah. I have to say, that line of Saskia's, do we really need multinationals to provide us with a cup of coffee in our neighborhood? It's actually one of my favorite lines in the film. And I have noticed now, I've seen the film several times, I laugh every time she says it. And I think I'm one of the few people in the audience who laughs, and I can't figure out why. But anyway, I think your question around, should we be engaging the hedge funds is an interesting, I think that was part of your question. I think is an interesting thing to think through. My preference, now, I'm a human rights lawyer and I use international human rights law as my instrument and tool. My preference is actually to engage governments who already have the ear of hedge funds.
Right.
Like you look, the private equity firms are playing and have a huge role in politics. Like when Donald Trump struck his economic advisory committee, now disbanded, but who was the chair of that committee? It was the CEO of Blackstone. And right now, there's an election going on in Spain. And what has Blackstone done? They've apparently said they're taking all of their units off the housing market until they determine which party is going to be most favorable to them. And then, they'll put them back. So,
and they're the biggest landlord in Spain.
Yeah,
by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Since a few years back. Yeah.
So, so they have, obviously, there's a very tight relationship between governments and these big financial actors. My preference, and in some ways it's easier in my position, is to sit down with government and get governments to understand what they are allowing to happen in their countries and the detrimental impact, and then get governments to bring the hedge funds to the table on this issue. I actually think that a lot of these hedge funds, private equity firms have no clue that housing is a human right,
right.
what that means, that there are government obligations in that regard. It is up to governments to assert that with the privates, right?
Well, and isn't this what public engagement and advocacy and raising the level of the conversation is really all about, and why it's so important to be making films like this, having conversations like this, and so on?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, people on the ground are very far. The tenants, as Fredrik said, and Stieglitz says, the tenants are very far removed from the hedge fund, but they're not so far removed from their local government. They're not so far removed even from their national government. And so, I mean, this has to be about a movement of people, really, right? This is where it has to come from. It has to come from the residents, the 40,000 who took to the streets in Berlin, the thousands that are taking to the streets in all over Spain, you know. That's where it has to come from. Well, they will have a hard time having a direct conversation with a hedge fund, but they can have direct conversation with their democratically elected governments, you know?
I've got to focus on a clip that you left in the film, Fredrik, where I believe, Leilani, you're presenting at the UN, and I think you make a kind of an off side. Well, just a quick remark, you know, didn't put a lot of it. Well, you know, everybody's on their phones anyway, or something like that, and then we actually got to a series of shots of people on their phone. Very funny on one hand, kind of tragic on another. How do you deal with the apathy? How do you deal with the people who really don't want to be around the table, or who don't have ears to listen, if you know what I mean?
I'm answering that. Don't get in there, Fredrik.
We had some fun in the editing room. Let's put it like that.
There was some editorial license there. No, but I think that point. I think it's an important point that the film makes, even if it's an uncomfortable point for me. I actually don't think it's. Look, I don't actually have too many conversations with those who are apathetic. Right now, I'm really interested in talking to the people who care and who want to make change. And there are a lot of people out there who are so motivated, including governments. I have, over the last 5 years, noticed a big change in the discourse, and that's important. I have now heard governments take to the floor of the UN and say things like, you know, housing is a human right, not a commodity. And I'm telling you, 5 years ago when I assumed the post, they were not using that language. It wasn't a mantra. It has become a bit of a mantra, actually, which is cool. And I'm not taking full credit for that. But what I think the film will do is it will give people a better understanding of why that sentence is so important. Why do we want to assert housing as a human right and not a commodity? Now we know, because Push tells us, you know. So I'm not right now focused on the apathetic or the people who are on their cell phones while I'm trying to give a speech. I'm really much more interested in talking to the people who want to engage this. And, you know, the Shift movement has 35 mayors on board, and they are, you know, cities of some repute, right? Like we've got Berlin, Amsterdam, Mexico City, Seoul, Barcelona, Malmö, you know, Copenhagen is thinking of coming on board. Geneva just came on board. Like, you know, New York, London, Paris, Montreal, blah, blah, blah. So
that's amazing. And cool. you know what, Leilani, sadly, we're going to have to wrap up here in a couple of minutes. And if I was there, I'd be looking at Jen right now. But anyway, can you tell me a little bit about as we wrap up here in the next couple of minutes, the movement itself? Because I mean, this is a reason for staying hopeful, for stepping in, and for not being, you know, hypnotized by the cynics and the people who aren't listening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the shift came about because I realized quite quickly, coming into the post of rapporteur, that there was no way I could fulfill my mandate and address the issues raised in the film Push on my own. That the forces are huge, the actors are huge with huge amount of power, and there was no way a little rapporteur could really address this. And so that's how the shift was born, was the idea of creating a global movement to say, hey, there's a whole lot of us out here who, including city governments, including national human rights institutions, including NGOs, artists, architects, urbanists, you know, et cetera, who view housing quite differently from these financial actors. So that was the impetus. And with no resources, et cetera, the ship kind of just took off. I have good partners, and it's resonating with people. And so there is reason to have hope.
And we can find out more about this, even if we haven't seen the film, on the website pushthefilm.com. Is there anywhere else, Leilani, is there anywhere else we can go to dig a little bit deeper if we want to find out more about it?
I bet you should also you should try to follow Push the Film also on Twitter and Instagram, and also Leilani's account, Leilani Farha, because the cool thing now is that a lot of people around the planet is talking about these issues. And so I think there is a lot of development of ideas and experiences right now, and we try to monitor that and share them. So please follow those channels, because there will be a lot coming in right now over the coming years, I think, because this is happening now. I mean, the bad things are happening, but there's also a lot of good things happening. Yeah. So we will try to share some hope also.
Well, I think you've certainly done that. Yeah. Sorry, Leilani, go ahead.
I only wanted to say one last thing, which is, the human rights message is resonating. And I think it's resonating for a particular reason. The reason being is it actually provides us with a vision for housing and for cities. It says that everyone has the right to live somewhere with some security and with dignity. And it's a simple concept, but it's so powerful. I think it has currency,
Absolutely.
And also, and the idea also with the film is to say, this is not so complicated.
Right.
It is not so. I mean, it's not so hard to understand that something is wrong out there, And as Stiglitz said, it's something wrong with destroying the planet.
Right.
I mean, it's something wrong making money out of climate change, but it's also something wrong making money out of people being pushed out of their homes.
Well, thank you to you both, and again, congratulations on an important, engaging, and a beautiful film. Oh, I have to ask this last question, Fredrik. I'm so sorry. I know we got to go. We got one more. I've got a whole other list. But to the simple act of kissing was the opening of the film. Almost. What was going on there? That was a really important, beautiful moment.
I'm a romantic.
There you go.
I like kissing.
You like kissing. Got it.
Also, I mean, I also love people coming together, and
right.
And in the film, I try to make it's also for me a song to the film is also a song to things we love about cities, people meeting, community.
It's community. I'm so glad you said that.
And then you get to kiss if you're hanging out at the right bars.
That's right. It's about people. It's about relationships. And
yes.
Yeah, well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. We've been talking with Fredrik Gertten and Leilani Farha about their important new film called Push. Have a great time at the festival. Enjoy the ride, and I wish you well.
Thank you
Thanks
so
much, David.
Thanks.
Thanks.